Morning. This is our kettlebell technique workshop. We'll be focusing today mostly on the kettlebell swing. And the reason for that is that when we look at kettlebells and what they are capable of, if you can master the swing, then you can, build upon that with lots of different types of exercises, more kind of advanced stuff. But getting that swing foundation right is the ideal thing to focus on first. So before we start any sort of technique-based workshop or exercise-based thing, it really is so important to do a warm-up. So we are going to be focusing on doing a warm-up today based around the muscles and areas that are most used in the kettlebell swing. So we'll spend 5 or 10 minutes doing that, then we'll crack on with the technique-based stuff. So thinking about the kettlebell swing as a exercise, we need to look at the muscle groups, which we're looking at mostly around the hips. The kettlebell swing is a hip hinging movement. That is how we distinctify it. It's how we make it distinctive from the squat, which is more of a knee flexing, knee bending, quadricep based exercise. The kettlebell swing is a hip hinge. We're using a lot of our hamstrings, our glutes, and a little bit into the lower back, and that kind of all of that hip area. So we need to make sure that we're understanding how to activate the different muscles, and also why it's important to warm up and switch on the different muscle groups that we'll be looking at for the swing type exercises. So without further ado, we are going to look at some movement based warm-ups for the swing. So we're going to plant the feet on the floor. We're sitting on our bottoms here, plant the feet on the floor. The knees are about 90 degrees, and we're going to start to drop the knees over from side to side. So we roll across the bum, turn the feet over, and the knees drop over onto the floor, going each way. So just do a few of those, maybe a minute's worth of these, just getting a little bit of flow going with the hips. If you struggle to get into this position, you can put your hands down behind your bum and just help yourself to move across. What we're looking at here is to get the hip joints moving around in a really nice, free-flowing way. So just passing across from side to side. If you are staying hands-free, use your core muscles to keep yourself upright as you lean back to open your hips. So moving from side to side. If you want to, you can add a little twist onto the end of the movement, touch down and twist. So we're just, again, warming up around the core and warming up around the rib cage as well. We'll do 2 more to each side. And then float back into the middle. We're going to have a little focus now on the lower back. So let's plant the palms underneath the shoulders and the knees underneath the hips. And we're going to think about breathing in, letting the tummy drop down, lifting the chest toward the front of the room. And then as you breathe out, push the shoulders and the spine up toward the ceiling and let the head gently droop down. Breathe in. Lift the chest, push the chest through the arms, and as you breathe out, spine and shoulders driving up toward the ceiling. Breathe in to the front, and breathe out, putting the belly button in toward the spine. So we're moving and mobilizing the whole of the spine in this movement now. In a minute, we're going to isolate the upper and the lower spine with different exercises, just to make sure we're really connecting with our bodies. So float back to that neutral position in the middle, keeping the arms nice and straight. I want you to drop your chest down between your arms and then drive back up into that neutral position. So the elbows do not bend here, the head's not hanging down, we've got a nice neutral spine. We're moving the trunk of the body down through the arms. You feel your shoulder blades pinch together, and then you're going to push back up and feel your shoulder blades come back apart. So we're gliding the shoulder blades here, and this should be a nice little release around the upper back area. If you don't tend to be quite stiff around the shoulder blades, just get those moving. Do 2 more of these. And then I want you to isolate the lumbar spine, the lower spine, this tailbone area here. So without moving the rest of your spine, or with minimal moving the rest of your spine, I want you to think about your pelvis. And I want you to tuck your pelvis under so that your kind of belly button pulls more up towards your chest and your tailbone tucks underneath your bum. And then I want you to do the opposite thing. You're going to push the tailbone up towards the ceiling and the belly button will move more down toward the ground. So just isolating that lower part of the spine by tucking and untucking the pelvis. It's a really small movement. When you tuck the pelvis in, you should feel the abs squeezing nicely. And when you untuck the pelvis, the abs should release slightly as well. One more of these. And then relax back into the middle. Tuck your toes under and come into a crouch. We're going to continue working into those hips. So using the elbows if you need to keep the knees out wide. Work from foot to foot. Just pushing out, getting a stretch on the inner thighs. Make sure the hips start to feel like they're loosening up. Again, if you struggle with balance here, you can put your hands down on the floor. It is early on a Sunday morning, so balance can often feel a bit wibbly of an early morning. I say early, it's not that early anymore, is it? Nearly 9. Okay, so what we're going to do from here, from the bottom of this nice deep squat, we're going to sweep up, breathing in, gently tuck the pelvis in and drop the arms back behind the head. Then as you breathe out, we're coming back down into our deep squat. So we'll flow through a few of these, breathing in, pelvis tucked. Try and make sure that when you come into this position, that you don't just push your hips to the front without thinking about the pelvis. Tuck in the pelvis. You've got that support for the lower back. When you drop your arms back behind your body, you get a nice stretch through the abs here. Breathing in, sweep up, tuck, drop the arms back, and breathe out to come back down. A couple more of these. One more big sweep up, breathing in. When you reach the top, breathe out and give the arms and legs a bit of a shake. So we're going to practice the hip hinging movement now. We're going to do that by, again, differentiating between how the squat would feel versus how the hip hinge will feel. So again, this is all kind of factors into warming up for this exercise. If we can create those mental connections, those mental pathways between what we expect to feel and what our body is actually doing in space, then we can really start to protect our bodies when it comes to doing these movements with the weights. Okay, so thinking about a squat, we've done a squat workshop for us. If you're not sure on that technique, you can always go back and watch that workshop after this one or before this one. You want to set your squat stance up. And if we're thinking about the squat, we're thinking about the hips are pushing backwards. So the hips are hinging, but the knees are bending and flexing and extending way more than they would in a pure hip hinge. So when we squat, hips push back and we bend the knees and we squat down as low as we can. We're aiming with a squat to at least get down to parallel, and if we can, aiming to get down even further. So there is a lot more movement and a lot more flexion and extension that goes on around the knee in that squat movement. So squats are great if you're focusing on a lot more quad-based stuff. The glutes do come into it, but when we kind of compare the movement to how much we draw in the glute muscles and the hamstring muscles for a hip hinge or a swing movement or a deadlift movement, we are more posterior focused rather than quad based. So squats, as a general rule, are more here and a little bit here, whereas deadlifts and swings, anything else hip hinge based, is more here. The quads will do a little bit, but it's like the reverse of it. So these are the primary movers, and the quads will help a little bit here and there. Okay, so we're going to do a couple of the hip hinge type movements just to warm up the mental pathways as much as the physical pathways to make sure that we're really getting it. So let's set up a nice deadlift stance. So we want the feet to be perhaps just slightly wider than your hips, and with the toes just slightly pointing out off parallel. So toes parallel will be pointing straight down the front of the room. Slightly off parallel is just slightly off that straightforward line. And again, there's no exact, angle that you have to hit with these. Over time, you will start to develop your own kind of positions that suit your body. We are all different. We will have different limb lengths. We have different angle joints. We have different, amounts of muscle. So there's lots of things to factor in when it comes to thinking about, which angle should I be at. I can generally say just slightly wider than your hips and slightly pointed out to the corners, just off parallel. But you might find that a bit wider helps you, a bit narrower helps you. When you get more confident with your body and how to move and position yourself in space, then you might just bring your foot in slightly or out slightly. You might angle out more or in more. Probably not in that way, because that wouldn't make any sense. But at least you might kind of play around with it and find the angles and the positions that suit your body better. So take what I'm saying as a general rule, and then try and apply the little tweaks and things as you get that feedback from your body. Okay, so set your feet up, turn your feet slightly outwards, and we are just going to work on that hip hinge. So I'm going to turn sideways just so you can see what I want you to do. So when we are hip hinging, like we said before, the squat we'll look at because we're going to get that really big flex through the knee. With the hip hinge, I want you to kind of imagine that you are sticking your anything below the knee is kind of set in cement. So you can't really move your knees forwards and backwards because you are stuck in cement from just below that kneecap downwards. So that part of the body is fixed. The knees can flex, but the only way that you can move is by pushing the hips backwards and then the hips forwards. So that's the movement we're going to practice now. You can put your hands wherever you want to. Sometimes on the hips is helpful so you can feel them moving. So without dipping the chest down, without kind of coming into this curved back position, I want you to push your hips backwards. Think about the chest staying lifted. We're not collapsing the chest here. And then drive the hips back in, tucking and squeezing the bum. So we're going to do 10 of these just to practice this hip hinge movement. I'm sorry, I'm a bit hay fevery. Okay, so drive the hips back. Think about those legs set in cement and push them back in. So we'll go for 1, 2, hips back, 3, hips drive back in, 4, 5, 6, 7, drive the hips and squeeze the bum, 8, 9, 10. So what you should hopefully feel whilst you're doing those movements, and this is what I started to notice as I got a few into there, you should start to feel, as you push back here, you should feel the hamstrings and the glutes, they should be lengthening, they should be getting a little bit of stretch on. And then when you're pushing back in, you're really squeezing these parts of the muscles here as you drive back in to support that movement. So we're going to do another set of those again because it's useful to keep repeating these movements to get them into our brain, to build those pathways between muscles and movements and what we want to do to support the actual swing movement. But it's also good because I want you to really pick up on the fact that these muscles are lengthening. You should feel them start to stretch out as you push your hips back. Okay, and again, if you're not feeling this, it could be because you are still trying to squat into that position. So again, think about the cement analogy. If your lower legs or lower part of your legs are stuck in cement, you cannot push your knees forward. It may even help you to kind of put something in your way so that you are not able to move anywhere forward with the knees. Just be careful about using a wall in that case because your body is coming forwards. You don't want to headbutt the wall, but just imagine, for example, that you have something in front of your knees where you cannot move your knees forward of your toes, and then that might help you to get into the right frame of mind about the hips. But just visualize those hips. We're doing 10 more of these now. Start to feel that connection of these lengthening as you push back. Then as you push in, they're really squeezing to get that nice movement flow. So 10 of these hip hinges again. Off we go. Push the hips back and in. 1, 2, 3. Keep the chest lifted. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, big bum squeeze, 10. Okay, one of the things to really watch out for when it comes to a swing movement is that when you push back in from the back here, we've got this nice position, we've got the stretch out with the hamstrings, the glutes are stretched out. As we drive back in, we're squeezing the bum, engaging the hamstrings, and tucking the pelvis in up here. We want the body to be in this nice kind of plank position. So imagine that you're planking on the floor. You know, you wouldn't be drop forward like this, and you wouldn't be out like this. You would have this tuck in pelvis here, this nice plank shape. One of the biggest mistakes that we make when we're swinging is we push in and we push too far. So again, that's just going to put a lot of pressure on the lower back. So just watch out for that and make sure that you feel that you can actually move in that way without that hyperextension of the hips here, which can put the pressure into the lower back and cause a lot of the lower back problems that are associated with swinging. And again, you know, we can often blame exercises and certain things for causing us injuries, but when we actually break the technique down, it's probably that we have a slight error in our movement pattern that we've done over and over and over again. If, for example, you've never been taught how to swing and you've just been doing it at home without really looking in the mirror, without knowing the different teaching points, it could be that you've gradually been exacerbating a little kind of movement-based thing. The lower back might be kind of a bit iffy, and one swing too many with that push out with the hips can tip the lower back into a spasm, which we definitely want to avoid. So just be careful with that one. And if you are not sure if you are moving correctly, or if you're not sure how to do it and what to do, we can always book in for a one-to-one online, and we can look at your technique and make sure that you feel confident with that before you keep doing it. Okay, the more we reinforce a movement with a bad movement pattern, the more likely it is that you are going to get injured. I've done this many times over the years, and it's taken me a long time to learn that technique is as important as it is. Okay, so we are going to start lifting some weights now. We've done a bit of warming up, we've done a bit of kind of body-mind connection here. So I want you to grab your kettlebell. So obviously this is a kettlebell workshop, so we're going to be focusing on using kettlebells. Not everyone's going to have one at home, but it is a handy piece of kit to have if you can get your hands on one at some point over the next few weeks or months. So they're quite versatile, they're quite useful, and having maybe a couple of different weights is a nice thing to have, because it means that you'll have more options for different types of exercises. So what we're going to focus on first of all is the kettlebell deadlift, because I need to know that you are competent with being able to pick the kettlebell up and put it down without kind of losing that nice position with the back and without losing that muscle engagement around that hip area. So with the kettlebell deadlift, and this is the same for any deadlift, whether it's a dumbbell deadlift or a barbell deadlift, whatever kind of deadlift you are doing, this will be relevant to all of that. So I want you to set your feet up as we just did. So again, have a play around with your own individual stance, but I'm going to be having my feet just wider than my hips and my toes slightly pointing out to the corners. So all of the technique points for the deadlift are exactly the same as the kettlebell swing, apart from the very last bit. Okay, so everything that we just did in that warm-up where we pushed the knees or the shins are in cement, we push the hips back and make sure the chest stays lifted and the shoulders stay down. So we don't want to be hunched up with the shoulders here and bunched over with the spine. As we push those hips back, we want to keep the chest lifted. Now, if your kettlebell is quite small, or if you're quite tall, for example, you may find that when you lean down or bend, kind of hinge down to pick up your kettlebell, that when you get to a certain point, you are not able to get any further without curving your back over. And this is where having someone check your technique or even being able to look in the mirror will be really, really useful, because you may be able to do a really good technique, but when you get past that certain angle, you then flop into a bit of a curve over back again, which is exactly what we're trying to avoid. So if that is the case for you, you could prop your kettlebell up on a couple of hard back books, and just play around with that height so that when you are hinging down, if you get to here, for example, and you can't reach your kettlebell, and then when you go further down, you end up like this. If that is the case for you, then stick a couple of books underneath and just find the height where you are able to pick it up with that nice shape in your back. If you're curving over, you are putting a lot of pressure onto your lower back and your whole spine, really. And that's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to make sure that we're getting that pick up and put down with a nice shape in the back. Okay, so get yourself nicely set up. I would recommend starting with a kettlebell that is moderately light. This is still part of the warm-up phase. We're still getting that brain-body connection going on. So let's just make sure that we are feeling confident with that. We want the kettlebell to be roughly in line with either the middle of the feet or around the heels, depending on how flexible you are. And then we're pushing the hips back, grabbing onto the handle of the kettlebell again. Do a quick shoulder check, do a quick chest check, do a quick mirror check if you can, and then do a quick head check. Make sure that you're not looking down at the floor, and also make sure that you're not looking straight forward as if there was a mirror in front of you. Another mistake that I see in the gym quite a lot is, we've got this really nice shape in the back, and then because you're trying to look at yourself in the mirror, your head and your neck sends the spine into this crazy alignment where we've got this really raised chin because we're trying to look at ourselves in the mirror. So with a kettlebell swing or a deadlift, the initial setup is such that you should be able to probably see your feet in the mirror. If you had a mirror in front of you, you'd be looking down or diagonally downwards. You'd be able to see probably from your knees down to your feet. So from here, we're going to do the same thing again. Knees stay more or less still. We engage the glutes, we engage the lower back, and as we pick the weight up, we push the hips to the weight. We do not overextend here. We tuck in and squeeze the bum. And then to put that down, hips push back, we put the weight back down. So we're going to do 10 of these. Lift, push the hips in, and push the hips back. Hey, no, stop it. Dog gets a bit angry. No, stay. Righto. What do we do? Good girl. Stay. Okay, so we're doing 10 of righto. No. 10 of these kettlebell deadlifts. So hips back, keep the chest lifted. Thinking about in this position here, the hamstrings are lengthened, the glutes are lengthened and stretching. As we lift, we drive the hips in, squeeze the bum, and then drive the hips back and tap down. So 10 of these, off we go. In and back. In, squeeze the bum and push back. So we're putting the weight down on the floor in between each one. Keep the knees in that cement. Think about the hip hinge. Think about pushing in to that plank position at the top of the movement, squeezing the bum, squeezing the hamstrings. We'll do 2 more. Big push, drive in, and then at the end we put down. And we only relax after we put the weight onto the floor and we can stand up and shake off. So again, that is another particular thing to look out for when you're doing the swings or deadlifts, is that the movement is not finished until you put the weight onto the floor. Quite a big mistake that I see again with these techniques is that we do like 9 or 10 really beautiful lifts, and then on that 10th one we're like, oh yay, I'm finished, and then we kind of go, ooh, the weight comes down and the spine goes into that kind of floppy C shape. So just make sure that you only finish the movement off when you have put the weight down with that nice shape in the back, put it down, and then relax and shake off after. Okay. So we are now going to move into the beginnings of the swing, and that is a movement called the hike. So the difference here between the deadlift and the swing is that we are starting with the kettlebell slightly in front of the feet. Move back slightly so you can see. So the deadlift is where the feet are either side of the kettlebell. The hike is a movement where the kettlebell is going to start maybe like a half a foot or 3/4 of a foot in front of your toes, and you are hiking the weight back between your legs and then getting ready to push up into that kettlebell swing. So, it's already hot today. So what we need to be thinking about here is, again, which muscles we are using to support that movement, to get the right muscle connection, to get the right activation in the muscles, so that we are not losing control of the weight. And probably the most important thing is to start light and build the weights up as we go. Okay, again, one of the biggest reasons for kind of losing balance with kettlebell swings is going too heavy too soon. So I would always recommend starting light and gradually kind of eking those weights up as and when you feel safe and when it's appropriate. And it's always better to be safe than sorry, as far as I'm concerned. So we're going to hike the weight backwards. So just make sure around you that you've not got anything you're going to hurt if you're going to be throwing kettlebells around. So set the kettlebell up in front of your toes. Do a quick posture check. Again, make sure that you can activate those muscles in the backs of the legs. We're thinking about hiking it backwards and then driving the hips and the bell forwards at the same time. So the kettlebell swing is not an arm lift. We're not lifting with the arms. We are hiking it back and using the hips to drive the weight to the front, and then we drive it backwards. So it's a combined movement. We use the hips to push, and then we come back in, set up again, and push back. So we're going to do the hike on its own for a couple of reps, maybe 5 or 6 reps, just to get used to that backwards movement. And again, get that nice kind of flow. It goes back and then we're back into the same place on the floor. So set that up. As you push back, you're hiking it up and back down, up and down. Hike it back and down. Get used to doing that hike, back and down, back and down. It can be a bit uncomfortable because depending on how heavy the weight is, it can sometimes smack you in your downward region. Just be careful with that area and make sure that you're not really giving yourself a bit of an injury down there just from the kettlebell hitting you. And that's quite important to avoid. But that hike movement is going to be, kind of touching that region. And if it's not touching that region, then it's probably not going quite into the right spot. So do a couple more of these. Hike it back and replace. Hike and replace. As you hike back, think about you're starting to engage the abs. We're starting to think about coming into that next movement, the push. Okay. So on the next few, we're going to get the swings going. Okay. So readdress the idea of what the body is doing, which muscles you're engaging. Think about lifting the chest. We're going to hike back and do a set of 10 swings, okay? So let's crack on with this. Hike it back, push the hips, and go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then when it comes down, we replace it on the floor in front of the body. So what hopefully you could see when I was doing that is that as I was driving my hips to the front, I was getting that nice hip hinging action. Hopefully I wasn't going into the hyperextension. And a couple of other bits to think about as well is not allowing the shoulders to really bunch up toward the ears. So the main kind of mistakes that we see with the kettlebell swing, and you can probably hear from my voice that even after 10 reps, that is an exercise that really gets the heart rate going as much as the muscles. So the hip hinge is the most important bit. So if we're not doing the hip hinge, it becomes more of a squat swing. And there's nothing potentially dangerous about the squat swing. It's just not the intention behind the swing exercise. Like we said, the squat is more of a quad-based exercise, and the swing is more of a hip hinge where we're using the posterior chain to drive that weight forwards and backwards. Okay, so try and avoid the squat swing. Think about the cement analogy, get the cement legs in the cement and get those hips pushing forwards and backwards. Really fire up those glutes. The glutes are so important with this one. Get those glutes really activated as you drive that bum to the front. And then avoid the chest collapsing. So it's particularly evident when, I think probably when the weight is a bit too heavy, when you maybe will lose balance, but you will also end up maybe kind of doing this sort of thing. You know, you're kind of in this kind of hunch position here where you're just trying to do your best just to get the movement here. It's very restricted, very stiff. We want the swing to be a fairly flowing movement where you feel like things are going quite nicely. We're using a bit of momentum, but also we're using a lot of our strength from our hips. Okay, so just watching out for those errors. Again, being able to do it in front of a mirror or in front of a real person that can give you feedback is going to be really valuable. But hopefully this is kind of giving you the bread and butter of how to get started with this technique. So let's go into a set of 20 now, and let's really focus on that bum activation and just having a quick check every 5 or 6 reps that we're not creeping up into this tension in the upper body. And when you think about driving the hips in, remember we're thinking about coming to here, the body should be a plank. So when you're up here, you're tucked in, you are feeling the abs engage. And that's important as well, because when the weight's in front of the body, we need this engaged here because we don't want the pressure on the lower back. So we're going to hike it back now, and we're going to aim for 20 reps, okay? All righty. Shoulders relaxed. Again, avoid the hunch, chest lifted, glutes and hamstrings stretched out. Hike the weight back and then drive forwards into the first swing. 1, 2, keep the knees still. 4, drive those hips. 5, 6, squeeze the bum. 7, 8, 9, 10. Keep the chest lifted. 12, 13, 14, 15. Keep pushing. 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. And stay engaged until you put the weight down. So have a little shake off with everything. Again, you should be feeling a little bit out of breath. We should be able to feel that the glutes, the hamstrings and the abs have been working hard to get that movement on the go. So I'm going to call it a day there, I reckon. So a couple of things just to finish off with. Excuse me, that's disgusting. A couple of things to finish off with before we go. A few of the exercises that can really help with getting the swing into a flow. Obviously, doing more swings is going to be helpful because the more you can reinforce that movement pattern, the more likely it is that you'll start to perfect it. But the other things that can really help are things like a lying hip hinge. So we're practicing that hip hinge movement with the glute bridge position where we're on the floor, for example, and driving the hips up and squeezing the bum. So lots of those types of movements. Also planks. So, thinking about what the whole movement requires, if we need to get our body into an upright plank position at that top point in the movement, then if we can practice doing planks, we can practice, again, connecting with the feeling of the abs engaging, the pelvis tucking in, and making sure that we're supporting the movement all the way through. Okay, so that calls a wrap, I think, on the kettlebell technique workshop. This is intended to give you a foundation of understanding in how to get started with the kettlebell swing, or how to pick up a few little, hopefully, gems on how to improve your technique if you've been doing it for a while, but not really feeling like you're connecting with it. So I hope it's been that for you. If you have any questions or any comments, you can post them into the comments box. Do try and tag me in comments that you make. Otherwise, I'm not guaranteed to see them. But yeah, thank you for your time today. I'm really pleased that you're here trying to improve your knowledge and improve your technique, because we want to stay as injury-free as we possibly can. And if you're really not sure about how to do it, or what steps to take next with how to make the improvements, then please contact me for an individual assessment, and we'll talk about you and we'll watch you move specifically and see how we can improve your swing or your deadlift, whatever you want to learn about. All right, I will see you soon for the next workshop. have a great week and enjoy yourself. Enjoy the swinging. I'll see you soon.